Alright, I'm going to say something that might render the rest of this video completely redundant, but in any case should be the single most important thing you take away from it. ELRIC of Melnibone may be one of the greatest pieces of fantasy literature you will ever read. I am not joking. I'm not being hyperbolic. I take this kind of thing very seriously. If you happen to click on this video simply to find out whether or not a series of novels and short stories that was written over 50 years ago is still worth reading today, well then there's your answer. Do yourself a favor, go to the nearest bookstore, preferably one locally owned so you can support your community, and buy this book. This one, right here, the one on the screen. Open it up, skip over the meandering, nonsensical foreword by Neil Gaiman, and start reading Chapter 1 of Book 1. Your time and money will be well spent, and you won't need to listen to the rest of my obnoxious rambling. Now, for those of you who haven't turned off the video, allow me to gush over what just might be one of my new all-time favorite works of fiction. I'm Tim from Secret Fire Books, and this is my review of Michael Moorcock's ELRIC Saga, Volume 1. Thousands of years ago, the island nation of Melnibone was the capital of an empire that had conquered nearly all of the pseudo-medieval realm known as the Young Kingdoms. Since then, the once great superpower has fallen into decadency, reduced to an isolated culture of murderers, necromancers, demon cultists, and hedonists. The only member of their wicked race to possess an actual conscience happens to be their current ruler, a sickly albino sorcerer by the name of ELRIC. Unlike his Melnibonean subjects, Prince ELRIC yearns for a time of peace and fellowship with the Young Kingdoms, and wishes to become the kind of wise and noble ruler who can one day lead his fallen people into an age of enlightenment. For this reason, ELRIC leaves behind his island of wizards and dragon riders to learn what he can of the outside world, and hopefully garner his own heroic legend, so that he might return to Melnibone a changed man. However, as ELRIC soon learns, the dangers of the Young Kingdoms, both mundane and magical, will test his courage and resolve in ways that he could never have imagined. What's more, he finds himself treading the line between the cosmic forces of order and chaos, his path tied to the power of the Black Sword, known as Stormbringer. The ELRIC Saga, or ELRIC of Melnibone, is perhaps the best-known work of prolific English author Michael Moorcock, and takes place within a fictional multiverse shared with the author's numerous other works. Originally published in the pages of Science Fantasy magazine in the early 1960s, the saga began with the novella The Dreaming City, but quickly spun off into an expansive series after Moorcock's fans and publishers demanded that he write more stories. In the tradition of older pulp fantasies, from which Moorcock drew plenty of inspiration, each story in the series sees ELRIC on a different adventure, at a different stage of his life, in a different place throughout the Young Kingdoms. Though written out of chronological order between the 1960s and the 1990s, this exact publication, and its subsequent volumes by Saga Press, do the job of placing the different novels and short stories in order, for the sake of simplicity. Before these Saga Press volumes existed, most printed publications of the ELRIC series were either collections of random entries in the series, or books that confusingly bore the titles of other stories by the same author. To my knowledge, there were previously at least 3 different books with the title ELRIC of Melnibone, only one of which actually contained the novella of that same name. Thank goodness I never tried to collect these books back in the 90s. Well, not that I was old enough to read these books in the first place, what with all the blood, guts, demon summoning, and steamy romance subplots. Unsurprisingly, the series' biggest draw is the protagonist that shares its name. ELRIC himself is a complex and fascinating anti-hero who makes for an excellent character study. Unlike some other sword and sorcery narratives, the ELRIC saga is quite introspective, often posing deep philosophical questions to challenge its main character, as well as the more tangible dangers and obstacles. On his many journeys, ELRIC ponders the meaning of existence, the relationship between good and evil, the necessity of both order and disorder, the importance and relevance of dreams and ambition, and the very concept of free will, as opposed to destiny. Interestingly enough, we are told from the very beginning of Book 1 that Prince ELRIC is fated to lead a life of turmoil and tragedy. This grim foreboding looms continuously over the rest of the story, ensuring that the reader is always aware of such an impending doom, even in the lighter and more uplifting moments of the narrative. For this reason, among others, the reader sympathizes with ELRIC. You want him to be a hero, or at least a decent man. Thus you revel in the odd moments in which his tender humanity shines through the layers of pragmatism heaped upon him from growing up in a community of literal demon worshippers. However, they don't call it dark fantasy for nothing. ELRIC, frail and sickly since childhood, requires a multitude of potions and alchemic drugs to keep himself alive, and is constantly under the watchful eye of the demon god Auriok, to whom the souls of Melnibone's people were sworn long ago. Things appear to turn in ELRIC's favor when he happens upon Stormbringer, a powerfully enchanted sword known as a rune blade that endows him with enhanced physical power and increased magical aptitude. Unfortunately, the Black Blade is also a parasitic demon who influences the mind of its wielder, feeds on the souls of its victims, and doesn't always give ELRIC a choice as to whom he kills and whom he does not. Complicating matters even further, ELRIC, who now depends on the cursed sword just to stand upright, must be ever cautious of those around him, as any potential ally in his quest for enlightenment could just end up as another soul-deprived husk on the tip of Stormbringer's blade. This is the philosophical and emotional crux of the ELRIC saga. You know that ELRIC, and anyone involved with him, is fated to suffer, but due to the character's noble dreams, admirable intentions, and overall charisma, you can't help but stick with him, through the good, the bad, and the even worse, out of a desire to see him prevail, even in the face of inevitable doom. For this reason, it's obvious to see why the saga and ELRIC himself have become cornerstones of dark fantasy, emulated by many other creatives in the following decades. Without ELRIC, we might not have our modern grimdark fantasies, our First Laws, our Witchers, our Vampire Hunter Ds. We might not even have the ELRIC brothers, come to think of it. But that's neither here nor there. What is both here and there is the fantastical world in which ELRIC resides. This was, for me at least, the most enjoyable aspect of the ELRIC saga, and Mr. Moorcock's writing in general. The locations in which ELRIC experiences his adventures, and the sequence of events that pushes his story along, are truly imaginative. While the physical realm of the Young Kingdoms is a typical medieval fantasy world, most of ELRIC's quests involve places outside the physical. Let me explain. Within just this first volume, ELRIC travels from his dragon-teeming homeland to a post-cataclysmic desert kingdom, to a literal dream world within the mind of a sleeping child, then to an ethereal ocean that exists between the flow of time and space, to a pocket dimension where he meets and teams up with other versions of himself from other realities, to an alternate timeline of his own reality, and finally, in the volume's last novella, to an interdimensional castle ruled by the living embodiment of paradox. Let it not be said that Michael Moorcock lacks creativity. The author himself has commented on his writing style, stating that he enjoys coming up with outlandish scenarios and storylines, then dropping his characters into them to see how they work. In the hands of a lesser author, this experimental method could very well cripple a story, but that doesn't seem to be the case for this author. From the beginning to the end, I was utterly enchanted with the fantastical dreamscapes of the ELRIC saga, to the point where the introduction of an interconnected multiverse was all the incentive I needed to check out Moorcock's other works. Honestly, there aren't many bad things I can say about the ELRIC saga. Any issues I had in my reading were pretty much just nitpicks that didn't actually affect my overall enjoyment. Moorcock's prose is simple and straightforward, but it's still punchy and eloquent enough to paint a vivid picture. His dialogue is nothing to write home about, but it still manages to give the characters their own distinctive voices. The individual books are short and fast-paced, but this is classic sword and sorcery. It's supposed to get to the point and cut out all the filler. Also, may I just reiterate that the main character is a chaotic neutral, edgelord necromancer who rides dragons, summons elemental spirits, travels across dimensions, seduces every beautiful woman he comes across like he's grimdark James Bond, and wields a glowing sentient sword that gives him berserker powers by draining the souls of the beings it kills. If that doesn't sound like the coolest thing you've ever heard, then you've clearly either A, suffered a terrible concussion, for which you have my condolences, or B, lost your humanity to whatever buzzkill of a demon you sold your soul to. Either way, we cannot be friends. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to start reading the other Michael Moorcock novel that just came in the mail while I was busy scripting this review. Have a nice day. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button, and if you want to see more book reviews, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. And if you're a fan of pen and paper role-playing games, please check out my book, Castle of the Crystal Blade. It's a single-player adventure book where you take on the role of a wandering barbarian who explores a haunted castle full of monsters and treasure. You can find it in the Amazon Marketplace. Until next time, farewell, and keep reading.